everybody. Welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. So, my Ray Bradbury book came in, which is amazing. I'm so happy about it. It's called Dark Carnival. It was first published back in 1947, I think by a company called Arkham Books. Something like that. I think they mostly did horror. I had it sent to Staples instead of having it sent to the house here because it would have an earlier pickup date. And it was really strange because you have to use your smartphone and you download the app and you do your Bluetooth and the locker door automatically opens. And it was a really weird experience. Nobody at the Staples knew how it worked. Maybe it doesn't happen very often. I don't know. It's probably the wave of the future. Amazon will just have key places that it delivers to, and everyone will have to go to those places in order to pick up whatever they ordered. There was a sticker on the back. I peeled the sticker off, and now it's really sticky there. I probably shouldn't have peeled the sticker off, but I don't want to have a sticker on there. I don't know. Hopefully that'll be okay. But it's amazing. You absolutely should get it. It is several of his early stories. They've been put together into this compilation. He has written so much more than has been put into compilations like this. If you wanted to read all the Ray Bradbury that's been published, you'd have to buy a ton of individual magazines because it'd be the only way to get a lot of his stories. It's actually kind of shocking. I think he was really picky. Two things. Number one, I think he was really picky about what he wanted people to remember him for. But also, I think that he was incredibly prolific. He just kept writing. Like there wasn't time to keep releasing new things because he was just always busting out new stories constantly. And magazines would pick him up, of course, because he was a big name. But this compilation is really great because they originally, Arkham Books only made about 3,000 of them because he was very hard to categorize. In 1956, when they were putting this together, he had 10 different stories published in that year alone. 10 different stories in like 6 different magazines. Of course, a couple magazines had 2 or 3 of his stories, but then there were several that only had 1 of his stories. And he had to spread out like that because he wasn't just writing the same type of stories. For instance, the 4th story in this, called The Homecoming, was originally published in 1946 in a magazine called Mademoiselle, which was a literary magazine, but it wasn't genre specific, I don't think. I think it was just literary works. And I read an interesting story about how he got published there. He got turned down. The Homecoming got turned down by Weird Tales or something like that. So he decided, I'm just going to send it off to these big literary magazines. And he sent it off to a few of those, including Mademoiselle. And I guess it stayed there for like 2 months, and nobody bothered to do anything with it at all. And then Truman Capote, I guess, was working there as an assistant editor or something. And apparently he found it on the floor in the editing room. And he picked it up and read it and really liked it. So he recommended it to the magazine. And they loved it. The story seems very strange to me. Truman Capote, of course, wrote Breakfast at Tiffany's. Eventually. I don't think he'd done it by this point, but he wrote Breakfast at Tiffany's, and I think he also helped with the screenplay, to be honest. A very famous writer, of course, obviously. And then Mademoiselle decided they were going to do a Halloween issue, and they made The Homecoming the centerpiece of the whole magazine, and they actually got the artist who created the Addams Family, the comic strip from back in the 30s. They got him to do a big 2-page painting for the story The Homecoming. And apparently Ray Bradbury liked it so much that he actually bought it off the guy. I'm trying to remember how much it was. I feel like they said it was like $3,000. It was really expensive, but maybe that's too expensive. Maybe it was like $300, but it was something really expensive. And Ray Bradbury could only pay $20 a month, so they made a deal, and he paid the artist $20 a month for the painting. And then eventually, when Ray Bradbury did a much later compilation, he was able to actually use that painting as the cover of the book because he owned the painting. So that was kind of fun. But this story, The Homecoming, is basically the Addams Family for adults. It's everything that I kind of wish Tim Burton was, to be perfectly honest with you. I always felt that Tim Burton was a little bit tame. This story is not tame. This story is crazy. It is so dark and so absurd. And it is basically just the Addams Family. Ray Bradbury didn't create the idea or anything. There was the monsters. There was all kinds of stuff just like this. But this is just so dark, right? You couldn't put this on television back in the 40s and the 50s. It's so crazy. So I'm going to start talking about The Homecoming now. I obviously highly recommend this book. You absolutely should get it. We'll be going through story by story and making our videos like we always do. I recommend the story The Homecoming. For a lot of people, it's a Halloween tradition, I guess. I never heard of it. I have the October Country, and it is in the October Country, which is super cool. So we'll get to talk about the differences in just a minute. Now, spoilers. I'm going to start talking about The Homecoming specifically. So The Homecoming is the story of this basically Addams family, this family that is all vampires and demons and monsters. And they have one child that is completely normal. By our standards. He's a human, completely normal, and he's really depressed about it. It's the night before Halloween, and they're getting ready for a giant Halloween party. And all kinds of family members are coming from all around the globe to this party. And the way that Ray Bradbury chooses to show us this is pretty cool. One of the family members always sleeps. She just lays in her bed and she travels the world by popping into other people around the planet. So the little boy who's human is standing by her bed and saying, "Are they coming? Are they coming?" And she's saying, "Yes, I can see this family member and I can see this family member, and this person's like a wolf and they're running this way, and this person's flying through the sky." And she describes all these family members moving toward the house for this Halloween celebration. Also, the Homecoming is not celebrated every Halloween. It's every 30 Halloweens. So it's once every 30 years this big party happens. So, of course, the kids are really excited because they've never had one before. So the family is being very traditional at this point because it's the 30-year homecoming. So for the last week, they've been sleeping during the day instead of at night, like they used to do. It says. So I don't know if there's less vampires, so a lot of them can go out during the daytime. I assume that's probably true. They do talk about how the two older sons run the mortuary in town, and that's how they get their blood, is when they drain the blood out of the bodies to put the embalming fluid in them for open caskets. They keep the blood instead of washing it down the drain, is what Ray Bradbury describes. So I guess they normally can be up during the daytime, but for this week in preparation for the homecoming, they've all been sleeping during the day and been up at night. And of course the little human boy's having a really hard time with it. He's pretty much exhausted all the time. But his job is to polish all of the wooden boxes that everybody's going to sleep in down in the basement when all the family members arrive. And there's like 50 of them. It's going to be huge. So they're polishing these wooden boxes for people to sleep in. They're hanging up this black crepe paper as like a celebration thing. They're just getting ready for the party. And the human boy is, of course, putting in all kinds of extra effort because he wants nothing more than to be like his family. He wants to be a monster but he's just a human. So they work through the night, and some family members actually show up. And there's one family member named Uncle Einar that is really good to Timothy. He works very hard to make Timothy feel like he can fit in and that he's part of the family, so he doesn't feel like such an outcast. And he shows up. So Timothy's very happy to see him, and Uncle Einar has giant wings. He's like a big demon. So he picks up Timothy and he throws him up in the air so that Timothy can pretend like he's flying. So then they go to bed in the morning, and when they wake up that night, it's Halloween now, and all the family shows up. It's this huge gathering. And of course, Timothy feels very left out. He just stands there, and he can hear people whispering about him because he doesn't like to drink blood, and there's all kinds of things that he doesn't do that all the other family members do. So eventually he's had enough, and he goes upstairs to talk to his sister again, who of course is asleep in the bed, but jumping around through people's minds. And it turns out that she is in the mind of a woman who lives in Southern California. And she's sitting out on her porch, and she's watching all the warplanes fly overhead. Now this, of course, was originally published in 1946. So it was very common for people to think about World War II. Of course. And I believe this is obviously a reference to things that were happening in World War II, because they were clearly going out to the Pacific. So she's watching all these planes fly out to the Pacific, and where she lives, there are all these huge pools of boiling mud. And she's just the person sleeping is describing this to Timothy. And Timothy says, "How long are you going to stay with this person?" And she says, "I want to know her, and I want to change her." And then the person stands up, and she walks out on the boardwalk. And just as she gets to the end, a bird swoops down, and she jumps from the human's mind to the bird's mind. And the bird flies up, and the woman jumps into the boiling mud and commits suicide. She dies in the mud, and the bird looks down at her as the woman sleeping looks down at her, and the last thing they can see is her hand, and they describe it as it looks like a spider as it sinks down into the mud. Really dark, really crazy. I imagine that every person that she occupies to travel the world, she kills. I assume. I don't know, but that's the impression that I'm getting. So then the bird, I guess, flies back to the house that they're in, and Timothy hears a commotion outside. I don't know what happens to the bird, but then the girl is inside herself all of a sudden, and she says, "Ask me what you came to ask me." And he says, "Okay, I want to fit in. I want people to like me." And she says, "No problem." She goes inside his body, takes over, and she runs him downstairs, and she says, "Hey, everybody, look." She grabs a big glass of blood, drinks it down, and then she grabs a bunch of these toadstools or whatever they've been collecting out in the forest, some kind of mushrooms, I assume, and eats a handful of those. Then she runs up the stairs, gets up on the railing, and dives off. And she's saying, "I can fly, I can fly." And then she leaves his body, so he realizes he's plummeting, probably to his death. But luckily, Uncle Einar grabs him, catches him, and then Cecil, I think her name is Cecil, the girl that sleeps all the time, says, "It was me, it was all me," and everybody starts laughing. So the kid feels terrible. He stands up and he throws up all the blood and all the mushrooms that he ate, and he goes running out into the barn. And he has a little spider that he keeps in a box. He takes the spider out while he's crying, and the spider jumps on him and crawls up, and it crawls into his ear. And it starts tickling the inside of his ear to make him laugh. And then it crawls out, and it crawls up here, and it looks up his nose, and then it crawls up onto the top of his nose, and it stares at him. And finally the kid relaxes, and he says, "What do you think we should do?" And the spider starts running toward the house. So he picks up the spider, puts it back in the box, puts it in his pocket, goes back to the house, And on the way, he bumps into Uncle Einar. And Uncle Einar says, this is really cool. He explains that living forever is a curse. He says the people who live the least enjoy life the most, and that for them the world now is basically black and white. And he picks up Timothy, puts him on his shoulder, and takes him all through the party. Anything that Uncle Einar's doing, Timothy's doing with him, which is really cool. So then the night comes to an end. It's the end of Halloween. A lot of people leave. A lot of people stay for just one more day until they take off that night. So everybody's going to bed. And Timothy is upset, and his mom can tell. And his mom says, I'm actually going to read this. This is really cool. This is the end. Because Timothy realizes, being human, he's not going to live forever. This might be the only homecoming he sees. But he might see 2, but he's not going to see 3. There's no way. So he's really depressed about not being a monster. And his mother says, "Son," she said, "we love you. Remember that. We all love you, no matter how different you are. No matter if you leave us one day," she said. She kissed his cheek. "And if and when you die, your bones will lie undisturbed. We'll see to that. You'll lie at ease forever. And I'll come and see you every Hallows Eve and tuck you in more secure." The house echoed to polished wooden doors, creaking and slamming hollowly shut. The house was silent. Far away, the wind went over a hill, and its last cargo of a small dark bat echoing, chittering. He walked up the steps, one by one, crying to himself all the way. Super dark, right? I mean, it's so crazy. And I found it very interesting because at first I was thinking that the weird thing about this story is it doesn't really have an arc, that he is fully aware that he's human and he wants to fit in, and at the end he feels exactly the same. But as I was talking about it with Dana, she pointed out that she felt, in the beginning, he felt there was hope that he could fit in. But by the end, he had realized there was no hope. He would never fit in, and he was just going to die. Which is just crazy. And it's so weird because the story feels light. It feels humorous. It feels like it's written for a child, But the themes and it is so dark and so depressing. It's really, really brilliant. So once again, I highly recommend that you grab this book. It's not just straight science fiction, right? This is 46. So I think this is obviously after the Asimov we've been reading, but before the Philip K. Dick we've been reading. It's kind of in the middle there. But it's so powerful and so different. It is absolutely worth looking into, and you need it in your collection. You really do, because it's been unavailable for so long. It's absolutely 100% worth it. All right. Well, I think I've covered everything, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please hit the like button. And if you want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.